In early May 2021, just as the United States was easing out of pandemic disruptions and preparing for summer travel, one of the most critical energy arteries in the nation abruptly went offline. Colonial Pipeline, the privately operated system that transports nearly half of the East Coast's fuel, found itself at the center of a cyber crisis that would ripple from boardrooms to gas stations, from state governors' offices to the White House Situation Room. The morning of May 7th began like any other business day at Colonial Pipeline's headquarters in Alpharetta, Georgia, until internal alarms suddenly tripped. A burst of unauthorized activity was detected across several corporate systems. Files were being encrypted, extensions were rapidly changing, and a digital ransom note appeared on screens demanding payment in cryptocurrency. What began as a typical Monday workload instantly escalated into a full-blown incident response scenario. The attackers were identified almost immediately. The intrusion was attributed to DarkSide, a financially motivated ransomware as a service group operating out of Eastern Europe. The U.S. government later confirmed the group had Russian origins, though not officially tied to the Russian government. DarkSide was known for targeted attacks on large enterprises and for stealing data before encryption, a tactic called double extortion. The breach itself did not hit Colonial's operational technology systems. The pumps, valves, sensors, and controllers that physically move fuel across the 5,500-mile pipeline. Instead, the attackers infiltrated the business network. Yet the company made a controversial but crucial decision: shut down the entire pipeline, including the industrial systems that were technically untouched. Leadership feared the ransomware could pivot into the operational environment. The risk was too high. The stakes were too national, too volatile, too dangerous. By midday, the largest refined fuel pipeline in the United States was fully offline. It carried gasoline, jet fuel, diesel, home heating oil, and military-grade fuel from Texas up to New Jersey. Its shutdown meant supply chains for millions of households and thousands of businesses were instantly threatened. It was the first time in the company's 57-year history that the entire pipeline was intentionally halted. Colonial's leadership team had minutes to move into crisis command mode. The federal government was alerted. The Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed DarkSide's involvement within hours. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency deployed advisors. The Department of Energy activated its emergency fuel monitoring protocols. The Biden administration launched a multi-agency response, elevating the event to a national-level threat. Across the East Coast, the public had no idea what was unfolding behind the scenes. But within 48 hours, the downstream effects became impossible to hide. Fuel distribution centers reported delays. Airlines began calculating reserves. Delivery companies revised routing plans. And consumers, hearing news of the shutdown, flocked to gas stations, creating panic buying that magnified an already strained supply chain. Footage from the Carolinas, Georgia, and Virginia showed cars lining up for blocks. Gas stations ran dry in hours. Governors across multiple states declared states of emergency to stabilize prices and prevent hoarding. Even though the pipeline's outage didn't immediately cause shortages, public behavior created a spiral that became self-fulfilling. Inside Colonial Pipeline's incident response war room, executives were navigating one of the most complex ransomware negotiations ever undertaken. DarkSide had encrypted business systems and exfiltrated nearly 100 gigabytes of corporate data. The threat was clear: pay or risk public exposure of stolen files on top of operational paralysis. With government advisors at the table, though never directly negotiating, Colonial made a controversial decision. They paid the ransom. The company transferred 75 Bitcoin, then valued at about $4.4 million, to obtain a decryption tool and prevent further data leakage. It wasn't simply a payment to regain access. It was a tactical maneuver to accelerate recovery and reduce business continuity risk. The decryption tool, however, proved painfully slow. Colonial's internal tech teams discovered that restoring systems manually from backups was still faster. The company continued reconstructing its environment piece by piece, validating systems, segmenting networks, and ensuring no residual threats lingered. It was a marathon under fire. While Colonial's recovery efforts continued, the U.S. government launched an unprecedented counterstrike. Federal investigators traced the ransom to cryptocurrency wallets associated with DarkSide affiliates. In early June, the U.S. Department of Justice announced it had seized 63.7 of the 75 Bitcoin after identifying private keys tied to the attackers, a rare public disruption of a ransomware group's finances. At the policy level, the Colonial incident became a turning point. Within weeks, the White House issued a sweeping executive order on cybersecurity for critical infrastructure, tightening standards around zero-trust security architectures, software supply chain transparency, and mandatory breach reporting. Pipelines, traditionally regulated for safety and environmental compliance, suddenly found themselves under cybersecurity scrutiny as well. For Colonial Pipeline, the outage lasted 6 days. On May 12th, fuel began flowing again, though the ripple effects took weeks to normalize. Airlines restored refueling schedules. Tank farms replenished stock. Gas stations slowly reopened. But the geopolitical aftershocks lasted far longer. DarkSide itself went offline shortly after the attack, claiming its servers and cryptocurrency wallets had been seized and its web infrastructure disrupted. Whether this was self-preservation or external pressure remains debated, but the group's brand effectively collapsed. The Colonial attack exposed something larger than a single failure. It demonstrated how tightly bound digital and physical infrastructure had become. An intrusion targeting a business network, not the pipeline itself, brought a significant portion of the U.S. energy supply chain to a standstill. That revelation changed executive-level thinking across every sector, from maritime logistics to manufacturing to healthcare. Corporate boards began demanding operational technology risk assessments. Insurance firms rewrote cyber policies with stricter underwriting. Chief information security officers gained unprecedented authority over industrial environments that were traditionally insulated from IT governance. The phrase cyber-physical risk entered mainstream leadership vocabulary. Perhaps most importantly, the attack shattered the illusion that essential infrastructure could remain untouched by criminal ransomware groups. Colonial Pipeline wasn't hit by a nation-state waging cyber war. It was hit by financially motivated criminals who never intended to cause a national crisis. Yet the consequences were national nonetheless. The incident also forced organizations to confront the gap between their digital maturity and operational dependencies. Colonial's own CEO later admitted that parts of its business network were outdated, fragmented, and ripe for exploitation. The attack became a case study in how technical debt becomes operational risk. When Congress and federal agencies reviewed the event, they emphasized a recurring theme. Ransomware had evolved from a nuisance into a national security threat. If criminals could bring down energy infrastructure, they could disrupt food supply chains, water systems, hospitals, or transportation hubs. Colonial Pipeline was not an anomaly. It was a warning. And that warning reshaped national strategy. Investments in pipeline cybersecurity increased. Mandatory security controls were drafted. Public-private collaboration accelerated. The Colonial incident became the catalyst that aligned cybersecurity not just as an IT requirement, but as a core pillar of national resilience. In the corporate world, the message hit even harder. Business continuity, brand reputation, supply chain health, and shareholder confidence were now directly tied to cybersecurity posture. Executives across industries acknowledged that downtime caused by ransomware could cascade into multi-billion-dollar consequences. The Colonial Pipeline attack lives on not as a story about ransom, but as a story about systemic vulnerability. It exposed the fragility of interconnected infrastructure. It demonstrated how criminals could accidentally trigger a national crisis. And it forced governments and corporations to rethink cybersecurity as an operational, strategic, and economic dependency. In the end, the event became more than a headline. It became a blueprint, a case study that continues to shape cybersecurity regulation, investment, and governance. And it sent a clear message to every organization managing critical infrastructure. The next attack won't wait, and the next outage won't be optional. The Colonial incident proved that cyber threats don't just compromise servers, they compromise nations. And in the aftermath, one truth stood above the chaos. In an era where pipelines run on code as much as fuel, cybersecurity has become the backbone of national stability.